hormones, especially with regards to the female reproductive system. You've heard of FSH, follicle stimulating hormone, so the follicle is growing. You've heard of LH, which stands for luteinizing hormone, because it does two things. It causes this ovulation to happen, and then the remnants of that follicle forms a corpus luteum. Luteinizing hormone, corpus luteum. And then estrogen and progesterone we've mentioned as specifically estrogen helping with secondary sexual characteristics, but these two hormones are very important in maintaining and keeping that endometrium intact so that if implantation happens, you don't have that miscarriage happening. So let's see how all of these now come together during the menstrual cycle.
Okay, so when it comes to this portion of the work, you need to really have your ducks in a row. So definitely practice this as a type of essay question leading up to your exams. Right, so Marichen has given us an overview in the very first slide as to all the hormones and how they have negative feedback and all of that. And 4 main hormones are of relevance during the menstrual cycle. So the first one being FSH, as we can see in the diagram right here at the top. That is obviously linked to the ovarian cycle. We have the hormone LH, estrogen, and then we have progesterone. So I tell my learners to make a list. Put FSH first, then you put estrogen second, then you put LH down, and then we have progesterone right at the end. So that kind of gives us like a type of guideline as to what is happening when. Okay, so we start off with our follicle stimulating hormone, as Marichen has mentioned. That's taking a Graafian follicle and it literally stimulates development for us. So that's going to be released from our pituitary gland. Okay, so as this now brings about the maturation of the Graafian follicle, we can see that there's also a hormone called estrogen that is being released. Now, this estrogen's job is to go and build that endometrium, making it thick, making it glandular, making it blood-rich, everything that we need in order for implantation to occur. Right, then we move to number 5, and this is now where the Graafian follicle is releasing the hormone estrogen. So as high levels of estrogen is being released, it actually brings about LH from being released from the pituitary gland. So those high levels of estrogen then will cause LH to peak. When LH peaks, that is when we have the Graafian follicle rupturing, so it will border to the wall of the ovary and it will release an ovum from that Graafian follicle. Now the remnants of the structure will pretty much shrivel up and that will form the structure called the corpus luteum. So the corpus luteum then secretes our next hormone, which is called progesterone. So as estrogen is building our endometrium, progesterone will maintain that endometrium, which is essential obviously because if implantation occurs, we need to keep that endometrium intact. So progesterone is vital during the pregnancy component to it. Okay, so progesterone, high levels of progesterone has a negative feedback mechanism, so it will prevent any FSH from being released, and then obviously as a result of that, LH from being released, so we will not have any further Graafian follicles being stimulated to form an ovums.
Yolandi, I always like to tell the kids, think of progesterone as the pro-pregnancy hormone. You know, it's rooting for that ovulated egg cell. It's going like, go, 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 no new follicles, no new ovulation, keep that endometrium and let's see what happens.
And it's actually scary because that hormone, that negative feedback system is so vital. Because now imagine if you had to fall pregnant, you have your baby, it's implanted into the endometrium, but your ovaries still kept on making over. And then if you were sexually active during a pregnancy, they will all get fertilized and you will end up having multiple pregnancies like a couple of months apart from each other.
I literally heard on the radio today about a condition where this happens, right? Where women can get pregnant after becoming pregnant, but it's like really rare.
Yeah, because then when the first baby comes out, now 9 months later down the gestation period, then perhaps your second child might not be ready yet.
Oh,
so,
goodness, yeah.
That negative feedback is definitely vital to prevent something from that from happening. Right, so let's get back to our diagram. And we move on. So now we've got our corpus luteum, okay, and it is now shriveled up, and pretty much it will decrease in size. So it will disintegrate eventually over the next couple of days, as we see linked here at the bottom. So as the corpus luteum shrinks, there's no longer a source of progesterone. So we also see a decline in the progesterone levels, which is directly linked to the fact that that corpus luteum is disintegrating. And yeah, pretty much that's it. Okay, so then we have at point 11, we see that due to that drop in progesterone, there's no longer a hormone that is maintaining the wall of the endometrium. So eventually, due to that lack of progesterone, the endometrium will start to break down, and that will eventually separate from the wall, and that is the starting point of your menstrual event. So menstruation will then start. Okay, so as the progesterone levels decrease, nothing suppresses that pituitary gland anymore, and we will find that FSH starts to be released again, and that will be the starting point to a new cycle, a new menstrual cycle. Okay.
So Yolandi, explain to them now, if this is obviously a graph of a woman who is not pregnant.
Yes.
So what are the things we need to look for if the graph was showing a woman who is pregnant?
Okay, so first off, the diagram shows us progesterone is decreasing, right? So that's our first sign that the female has not had intercourse, there's not been any fertilization event. So that's a telltale sign. We can also see from the endometrium that it's starting to break down. So here we see that that endometrium is now the starting point of menstruation. If fertilization had to occur, that would still be like maintained. But also a telltale sign is this corpus luteum, which is busy disintegrating. So we can look at three places. The two places that you should focus on is whether the corpus luteum remains intact in size or decreasing in size, and what this progesterone curve is doing. So if the progesterone curve drops, no fertilization. If fertilization has occurred, that progesterone levels will just stay high, okay, or will be continue to
and
be
then
secreted.
I know in a previous lesson you also gave the kids a nice tip about if you get these graphs of hormones and they're not labeled.
Yes.
How do you know which hormone is which line?
So you have to be careful with that one, because now, yet again, what they do is it's scenario based. I think that the one that we would definitely can link to is right at the end. If it starts to dip, that's a definite progesterone one, and they can kind of work backwards. Usually with LH, that coincides with day 14, where it will be at its peak. So you can look for LH as well. And then, as I said, I normally tell my learners to number the hormones. So we start with FSH. So usually that's the one that peaks first. And then as a result of FSH being released, estrogen starts to peak. As a result of estrogen being released, that stimulates the release of luteinizing hormone. So you can kind of work your way forwards or backwards, whichever way around. But look at the scenario that they sketch for you.
I also want to give the tip that with regards to estrogen's graph, it's the only graph that peaks twice.
Yes.
So you see the peak in the first half of the cycle and in the second.
Which coincides with the increase in FSH.
There we go.
Yeah.
And the progesterone peaks towards the latter part, so the second part of the cycle. So yeah, make sure you go through many examples of questions, but this is definitely a section that they like to ask questions on.
They can either ask it as an essay question or scenario-based question, asking whether the female has fallen pregnant or not, or they can give you a diagram and you have to answer questions based on the diagram or the graph, and then obviously write a little mini essay on that topic as well.
Yep.